So hi everybody, my name's Kofi Kankam. I am one of the co-founders of Admit Advantage. I consider you guys my people. I'm on Beat the GMAT all the time. We consider Beat the GMAT to be a really amazing platform and a great partner, and we've been working with them for a couple of years. And I can already tell by some of the names here that I've been answering a couple of your questions for a couple of weeks. Today, we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk really about sort of cracking the Harvard Business School application. Obviously, Harvard's one of the best schools in the country, in the world. It's very hard to get in. As many of you know, about 70% of the people that apply are qualified, yet about typically 11 to 13% of the candidates get in, as is the case for most schools. So I'm going to give you guys, some strategies, some ideas about the application, things you can do to make yourself a better candidate. And then we're going to leave plenty of time at the back end for questions. If you do have questions that are pressing, feel free to basically type them in. I probably, unless it's really timely or time sensitive, I probably will try to hold those questions to the end, but if it is pressing, feel free to type it in. Your question can be asked anonymously. I will basically just refer to you by your initials so that you know I'm answering your question, so don't feel like any question is a bad question to ask, okay? So with that, let's get started and deep dive into this. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about our company just so you feel comfortable that we know what we're talking about, those of you that are not sort of on Beat the GMAT all the time. And then I'll speak about sort of HBS generally, and then we'll deep dive into the essays, and then have Q&A on the back end. So our company essentially is an admissions consulting company that helps people soup to nuts from beginning to end. So anything related to your overall application strategy, editing for content structure, grammar, mock interviews, school selection, resume help, et cetera, is what we focus on. There are really three simple tenets upon which our company is built. Experience, so all of us are alumni from top-tier schools who've also been on the other side of the table. So, it's a pretty rigorous process to be part of our company. We're actually one of those kinds of companies that have benefited from the difficult economy in the last couple of years, and that we'll be able to really hire amazing people who are not just alums of really good schools, but also have, really great sort of bedside manner, are very client-oriented, have a really wealth of experience, etc. And most of us have been on the admissions committee as well, either formally working in the admissions office, serving as a second-year interviewer, and or serving as an alumni interviewer. So we've been very careful to make sure that we have that kind of scope in our backgrounds. We really believe in sort of client service and sort of alignment and focus. So, we end up becoming pretty good friends with our consultants. Our clients. We've been to a number of weddings and graduation parties and sort of send-off parties. And obviously that makes for a fun company. We are sort of a fun-loving set of people, but it really is equally important because it makes our clients feel comfortable with us and feel comfortable telling us things in their background, often which we use to sort of help them craft their application. So we want to, it sort of serves the purpose of making the company fun and interesting for us and for you, but also making sure that you feel comfortable enough where you're telling us things, bad things that have happened in your life, challenging circumstances you've had to overcome, and we're able to sort of help craft that into a winning application. And then performance. At the end of the day, all of this is a moot point if people are not getting into school. And we've been very fortunate to have good candidates, and we think a really good process as well in being able to place people in these schools. We have candidates in these schools, all these schools right now, and people obviously that have graduated from these schools, and this is not a full list, but it is somewhat of a representative list, okay? I'm Kofi, just a little bit sort of on Eric and I. I'm not really sure why. We're probably the two dumb guys in the company. But I'm Kofi. I worked at Accenture, used to be Anderson Consulting. I worked at Net2Phone, which was sort of an early voice over IP company, predecessor to Skype to a certain extent. My interest and background is in entrepreneurship, specifically with an educational and technology bent, and that's sort of where my career has been. So I sold a software company coming out of business school. In business school at Wharton, I was a member of the Venture Initiation Program, or VIP. I did my undergraduate degree at Harvard College, where I majored in neurobiology. I stayed and pursued a master's in education from there, and I was fortunate enough to get a Joseph Wharton Fellowship, which I think was for about $45,000 or $50,000 to go to Wharton, which at the time was a lot of money. Now it's unfortunately not as much. I ran the Whitney Young Conference, which is Wharton's largest conference, and I was a marketing teaching assistant. I also have served historically as a Wharton and Harvard alumni interviewer. Eric, actually more impressive background, worked at Accenture as well, started a company, spent a lot of years at GE Capital. He sold the company with his brother, and he went to Brown where he majored in engineering, electrical engineering, went to Wharton, graduate in honors, and was a Twigo fellow. Our consultants are actually better than us deliberately. We're trying to be the dumbest people in the company, and I think we're succeeding. We've managed to find people that are alums of many, many great schools and companies. So beyond the schools I mentioned, we also have people from McKinsey, people from the startup world, people from Google, Facebook, Goldman, GE, the UN, et cetera, et cetera. So we have consultants that match your interest and that match basically your background. And that actually is a deliberate choice. And these are some of the people on the right that are part of our team, and it's all on our consultant page. Okay? That's all I'm going to talk about on the company. Anything else, you can email me or you can look at the website. I do want to deep dive into the material if you guys don't mind. So HBS. People think of HBS, it's really interesting because we talk to people all over the world, and pretty much every day, at least a couple of people that I talk to mention HBS, and I always ask them why they want to go there and what it means to them. I get a bunch of different answers, but they all fall within sort of these general confines, right? So people think of the brand, the Harvard brand in general. It's an amazing brand to be part of and to be able to leverage for your own personal goals. Entrepreneurship, there are obviously a lot of entrepreneurs that have come out of Harvard, old entrepreneurs like Arthur Rock, to new entrepreneurs like some of the women from Gilt Group or Rent the Runway, etc. Right, global. I think that sort of goes with the brand. It is exceptionally diverse, so there are going to be people from the military, from McKinsey, from the nonprofit who are entrepreneurs, as well as sort of ethnic diversity. I mean, Harvard diversity generally means diversity in every single indice and sort of metric, right? Prestige, clearly that's part of the reason why a lot of you are attracted to the program. The case method, which is the method of sort of looking at business protagonists and sort of their situations and then making decisions about how you would operate with the same kind of information. Leadership, which I think is pretty clear. Those are sort of the big characteristics. Partially what I'm saying to you is that when you write about your application, when you write about your interest in the school, or you speak about your interest in the school in your interview, or you have your recommenders write about your interest in the school, so it's not necessarily you writing about it, you probably want to include some of those elements. Now, Harvard knows that they're Harvard, okay, meaning that you basically saying you've loved the school since birth, you wanted to go there for college, but whatever, you didn't apply for whatever reason, that is not as compelling as basically indicating specifically what it is about the program you love, the leadership, the brand, the leadership, the entrepreneurship, the diversity, and then taking a step further and thinking about exactly how it is you're going to extend that sort of culture and history. So try to reflect those values that are relevant for you within your application. That's kind of the first point. By the numbers, the class of 15, it's funny because while the application has changed somewhat, back in sort of my day, I didn't apply there, but back in my day when people were applying, there were 6 questions, right? And then there were sort of 3 essays. And then they sort of have moved things around where now you've got sort of 1 optional essay. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of sort of concern among sort of the banking private equity crowd about Harvard all of a sudden not accepting as many bankers or private equity investors. The reality is these numbers have not shifted that much. So on the top end, in terms of what the applications looks like, it's changed a little bit. But the underlying composition of actually the course of the class itself is not changed materially. So pre-MBA industry, you do have a number of people coming from consulting. It's about 20% of the class. Between consulting and financial services, historically, it's about 30 to 33% of the class. a third. So you may argue, depending on how you see your viewpoint, that that is a lot of the class, but I would argue that a lot of you, you know, when I sort of speak to you, everyone thinks, oh, you know, people always tell me, well, I don't come from banking or consulting. I think I'm going to have a hard time getting in. The reality is 2/3 of the class is not from banking or financial services or consulting. So you're actually in sort of the majority not being from those fields, okay? You see that military is actually pretty substantive. The reason why is because of leadership. High tech and communications, I predict that that will grow over time, just because there are more students that want to build companies, and those companies are having a little bit more of a positive sort of run from the press than financial services companies, and financial services companies are changing, not hiring as much, and the compensation is changing. So I think today, I think if you're coming from sort of high-tech communications, I think even if you're coming from consumer products, I think if you can sort of highlight just sort of even actually all non-areas outside of finance, if you can highlight what you're bringing to the table and how this is going to impact your classmates coming from like consumer products, high-tech communications, military, nonprofit, et cetera, if you can highlight that, I think that you basically can be in a pretty good position, okay? Undergraduate majors, there are a number of people that, you know, are applying to college, you know, nearly 60% historically, who are not business, economics, or finance. So you were not really at a disadvantage, nor are you that much of a unique entity saying you major in biology, right? That's I won't say that's quite par for the course, but that's not as unique as you think. So if you are majoring in something, you did major in something that's a little bit unique, it's really incumbent upon you to describe why it's relevant to your classmates, because it may not be quite as unique as you think. And don't assume that just because, you know, you focus in physics in college that you're definitely going to be such a unique asset to get into school where you don't have to explain it. Okay? Class composition, I think it's probably what you think. Women are, in a good way, an appreciably growing percentage of the class. Now it's at, you know, over 4 in 10. There is sort of a high minority composition of the class as well. These schools tend to be pretty heavily international, usually 30 to 35%. Harvard's one of the most international ones, I'm sure a lot of you can imagine. The age, it's 27, so it's not 24, 25. People call me all the time and say, I'm 28 years old, am I too old to apply to Harvard? No, you're not. You're, you know, you're a little bit on the older side, but you're not dramatically above their mean. A number of undergraduates, institution represented, and the GMAT score. Now, this is highlighted because while the range is quite wide, in terms, this is the middle 80%, that is quite wide, the median 730, and there are a handful of people getting in who have below 600, and I would say it's probably no more than 2 to 3 handfuls of people in a class of 930 people that basically have below like a 620. Okay, it's not that many people, so just keep that in mind. And then citizenship, I think you'll see that it's quite diverse. Now, numbers-wise, you know, Harvard is a school that accepts very few people and has a really high yield. And what that means is if you are typically waitlisted, yeah, they do take 40 to 50 people off the waitlist every year on average, but Harvard's one of those schools where if you're waitlisted, you know, there's so many people that actually get in that want to go that your chances are not high compared to other schools. Okay? Hopefully a lot of you know this already. If you're thinking about Harvard, you should sort of have done some general research on this, but I do want to sort of set this as a base. What are they looking for, right? So we get this question every day. What are schools, Harvard in this case specifically, looking for? I personally, by the way, don't think that schools at this level, the top 5 schools, are looking for that much that's that different. But for the purposes of this discussion, speaking specifically about Harvard, Harvard's looking for a couple of things, right? So they want leadership. So leadership is not necessarily you having a big title in your job. Most of you are fairly young. And you're out of school, and you're not, just by general structure of your workplace, once you have your own company, you probably are not going to have huge leadership. You're not going to have a huge title. However, they are looking for you to sort of be a leader amongst your peers, right, professionally. That's sort of the biggest and most obvious instance of sort of where you need to lead. So if you're an analyst at a company, or an associate, are you one of the lead analysts? Are you training sort of other, if you're a second or third year analyst, are you involved training first year analysts? Are you mentoring anybody? If you're sort of running a portion, if you're doing a big deal in a company, do you have sort of a portion that you're responsible for that's fairly important but isn't necessarily demonstrative of leadership of the entire project? So, I would say leadership in a professional environment, clearly leadership in an extracurricular environment. Those of you that are doing various activities outside your job, if you're doing many activities, but you don't have leadership role in any of them, and you can't have leadership roles in any of them because you just are spread out too thinly, my recommendation is to condense that base of activities and try to get leadership in at least one or two of those, okay? Because for young candidates applying to school, your ability to basically to lead in your job might be a little bit compromised, but there should be opportunities outside of your job where you can take a leadership role, and the schools want to see that. Those are actually quite important, and they're quite important partially because they will help underscore your impact. So, when I look at resumes, I see a lot of candidates that write about sort of responsibilities, but they're very short on writing about impact. And leadership is about impact. It's about leaving a legacy. And from a school's perspective, HBS's perspective, they want to feel like if you come there, you are going to be someone that made the place a little bit better than when you left, and that you are about improving their institution as a whole. So look for opportunities outside of your job as well as in your job to have leadership, and make sure that you're focused on impact, not just a delineation of your responsibilities. There is a difference, okay? They're obviously looking for analytical aptitude and appetite. So clearly, the mean GPA is typically about a 3.65 to 3.72. That's pretty high, okay? And the mean GMAT is typically about 725 to 730, 730 plus. Median's about the same. So you need to basically show that you're not an intellectual lightweight. You need to show that you are really looking for knowledge, looking for improvements, that you're not sort of satisfied with your current success. I can tell you, when you sit in a school like a Harvard or Wharton or Stanford, any of those kinds of schools, and more, by the way, you will literally sit there early and think, not necessarily I'm the dumbest person in this class. I think that's sort of a cliche, but you would literally think, I can't believe I'm in business school with this person here, right? This person is super smart, and you might be a little bit intimidated the first week or the first 2 weeks, sort of making comments. So they want to don't have the hubris. A lot of you are talented, but don't have so much hubris where you think that you know it all, or you think that you're the best applicant, because you're probably not, to be honest with you, applying to a school like Harvard, right? They do want somebody who wants to be involved in cases. So through your career at Harvard Business School, you're going to go through probably about 580 to 600 cases. They want to make sure that you have an ability to keep up, and you have an ability to thrive in that environment. So you're going to read these cases, and for a lot of you, that's going to be new in the sense that there isn't necessarily a clear answer about what a business protagonist should be doing. These are deliberately gray areas where you have to make decisions and make calls, and you need to be prepared to be challenged. Your peer is going to say, I disagree with you on that. That's wrong. You didn't do it correctly. That's not the way I saw it. You need to be able to sort of thrive in that environment, not take it personally, have responses, be prepared for feedback, and be prepared to change your way of thinking and enjoy that kind of interaction. If you don't enjoy that interaction, then you shouldn't be going to school like Harvard, because you're going to get a lot of it hot and heavy in those cases that you're doing. Okay. There's a question about sort of, is it viewed poorly by the admissions committee to say you want to go to Harvard for the brand? I wouldn't say it's viewed poorly, but that's kind of obvious, and I would say you're wasting sort of space in saying that. If you are going to say that, I would not say that. I would not lead with that. Harvard knows they have a great brand, and they're not looking for people. From their perspective, they're not looking for people that sort of fawn all over the brand. They're looking for people to extend the brand, okay? And there's a big difference. So you may look at it from the perspective, I get to go to Harvard, I get to go to the Harvard Club. And Harvard Club is really nice, I will tell you. It's beautiful. It's a great alumni network. It's amazing, but the school doesn't want a bunch of people that are following. They want a bunch of people that are leading. And so saying you want to go for the brand kind of puts you in a position where you're trying to sort of take advantage of sort of the stature that's been built up already by the school versus wanting to come in and do your part to sort of extend the culture and extend the brand and the stature. So I would think about it from that perspective. Okay. Harvard's also looking for engagement. So, you know, my sister went there, class of 10. I remember going to her graduation, and I remember the dean at the time saying, you know, there's a big L and there's a little L in terms of leadership. So you don't necessarily have to be running the Red Cross. You don't have to be running HP. You don't have to be president of the country, right? These are all positions that, you know, Harvard Business School alumni have had fairly recently. But you do need to basically be taking your education and your opportunities and sort of all the privileges you had and being at a school like HBS. They do want to see that you're taking and leveraging your community, okay? Whatever your community is. So it could be a religious community, it could be your neighborhood community, it could be a professional community. They want to see that you're interested in leading. Harvard Business School believes that leadership training, you know, master's in business administration, it is basically something that can benefit all organizations, including those outside of business, in the nonprofit, and also in the personal sort of arena. So make sure that you're demonstrating that kind of interest as well. And obviously campus involvement, they want to see that you're not just going to go to school and sort of take, which is similar to sort of the sort of my answer to the brand question I just answered. They want to see that you're going to sort of invest, right? And investing, you're going to invest and be involved. You're not just going to go there and try to find a job and sort of get out. They want to see that you're going to help nurture other people. You're going to bring your talents, your assets, all of your resources to bear on making the community better, both as a student and as an alum, and sort of the wider Boston community as well, okay? And obviously being a good teammate. So a lot of you, again, are impeccably talented. A lot of you are used to sort of being the #1 person. You're going to go to a place like Harvard Business School, and there are going to be a lot of people there who are really smart, and there are going to be people who've been doing something longer than you've been doing it, including sort of the clubs, and you're not going to have a chance to lead in everything you want to do, and not necessarily initially. So they want to see that you can be a really enthusiastic member of a team, even when you're not necessarily getting your own way or having your own sort of ideas sort of executed on. Maybe it's following someone else's ideas that are in direct opposition to what you think. So Harvard's really interested in making sure you're a good teammate in that sense. Okay? The thing we always tell people in the essays, and I think this is particularly true with Harvard this year, I think kind of the fewer essays you have, the less real estate you have to sort of make sure that you do a good job, right? And the less opportunity you have to sort of fix a mistake. So the first thing I would tell you is you have to know what you're going to say before you start writing, right? Now, this year you're fortunate. The question's kind of open-ended. But even if it weren't, you have to have an idea of sort of what you want to express. Like when you look at your essay, when you look at your 2 recommendations, when you look at the non-essay data portion of your application, when you look at your resume, those sort of 4 platforms, what are the character traits and what are basically the specific stories, experiences, and accomplishments that you want to express across those 4 pieces of your application. Now, my recommendation is you actually think about sort of the stories, experiences, and accomplishments that encompass your life. If I interviewed a sibling or your best friend or, you know, or a parent, and I said, what are the stories of Jack's life that I need to know to understand him? They'd probably be a mixture of personal, professional, community, and maybe academic sort of stories and experiences, okay? You want to have sort of that set, that category of sort of things that you could talk about. And then you want to think, okay, for each of these specific stories, experiences, and accomplishments, what are the specific leadership characteristics? What are the specific business characteristics which, you know, are demonstrated by those things? This is a show and tell sort of example, right? A show and tell exercise, rather. So things like being innovative, being a great communicator, being able to make decisions and limit information, being civically or community-minded, being adaptive, you know, being able to lead without authority. Those characteristics should be demonstrated by those stories, experiences, and accomplishments, and you should be trying to weave those things throughout the course of your application, right? Now, because you only have 1 essay, you probably are not going to be able to get all of that stuff out in the same way when you had 3 or 4 essays even a couple years ago, right? So what you're going to have to do is basically decide what you're going to include, which of the stories, which of the leadership characteristics are going to be included in your essay, and then you're going to have to decide, okay, which ones do I want included in recommendation 1 versus recommendation 2, which are ones that potentially I can sort of more heavily weight in my resume, and which are some that I'm just not going to be able to include, period. And you have to sort of get comfortable with that. But you need to know up front how you want to package yourself and what you want to express, okay? This will allow you to differentiate yourself in terms of, allowing you to sort of, if you're working in a big company where a lot of people apply to business school, consulting company, let's say theoretically, or VC, there's always an issue of, okay, well, how do I make this application true to myself? That's how you do it. You do it by sort of thinking of yourself non-linearly, but really in sort of a complex matrix with different indices, and basically try to find those characteristics and those stories that you can sort of bring together. It will also allow you to highlight your passion. And Harvard Business School really wants people that are passionate about what they're doing. Really wants people that have this sort of infectious enthusiasm that can bring other people along. They want that. And again, when you're looking at an environment where 70% of the people that are qualified, 7% of the people that apply are qualified, yet only 12% get in, the numbers aren't enough, right? So having a 3.6 GPA and a 740 GMAT, it's kind of just to check the box. That's great, you have it, amazing. I can't tell you how many people I talk to and our company speaks to literally every year, and it's actually happened, it's sort of happening last week when decisions came out. People reach out to us and say, I don't understand. I had a 3.5, 770 GMAT. How could I not even get an interview? They've got no idea how this happens. And the reason is because they weren't, well, first of all, they're just too many good people, but oftentimes those candidates are not thinking about their applications from a holistic standpoint and making sure that they're including all these different elements in the course of their total package, okay? And it's up to you to sell the dream. So what I mean by that is you have to have a clear picture of your goals. Now, to be honest with you, there's some gamesmanship in terms of getting into school. And a lot of you are saying, well, how the heck would I know what I want to do when I've only worked in one job for like 3 years? I'm 25, 26 years old. I understand that, but you do want to have an idea of kind of why you want to go back to school. It shouldn't just be because you want to be part of a brand or you want to make more money, or you saw, the idiot next to you, that you did all his work or her work and her job, go to school, and you're basically just as smart and you think you should be able to get into Harvard. That's not good enough. So you do want to have an idea of what you want to do. Let's call it in the next 3 to 7 years, and sort of 7+ years. So it's not about your job after school. So we talked to a lot of people that say, oh, I want to go to Harvard so I can go into consulting. Okay, is consulting long-term? No. Well, so consulting is just your job after school. That's different than your career. When you think about your career, just to give you a better idea of how to sort of address this, think about it along these indices. Industry, role/function, title, and location. And I would say the more specific you are about all 4 of these, the more crisp your application will be, as will your motivation for going to school, which is really important. And I think, you may not know all of those indices, but you should know a couple, right? You should know if you want to do healthcare versus technology. You should know if you want to be in marketing, or you want to sort of be in strategy, or you want to be in operations. You should have an idea of that stuff. If you don't have an idea of that stuff, my contention is that you probably should not apply to school right now until you know you want to do that. Because whether it's Harvard, whether it's Columbia, whether it's Stanford, whether it's Tuck, whether it's Wharton, it's too big an opportunity cost in terms of money you have to pay and not making money for you to go to school, not knowing what you want to do. I spoke to a woman last night, a very good friend of mine, who I went to college with. She went to Harvard and she went to Wharton with me, and she told me that within 2 weeks of being in business school, she kind of knew she didn't want to go, didn't want to be there, but she couldn't tell her parents that she didn't want to be there. And so, she paid for business school out of pocket, wiped out her savings, and she has a good career, but the reality is she didn't really need to go to business school for her career. And she loves the relationship she built, but going to school, she didn't have to go to school, and she's ambivalent at this point about whether or not it made sense for her to go to school. You don't want to be in that position. Just because you can get in doesn't mean you should go, okay? So the essay. So the essay is sort of as you see below. Basically, they're saying that, they have, I'm not going to read it for you, but they're saying that they have all the other stuff regarding, all the nuts and bolts of your candidacy, right? They've got all sort of the numbers and what you've done and the test scores and recommendations. They're asking kind of what else is important. So this is kind of a similar question to Stanford's in a way, asking, tell me what's important to you, right? Or it can be. But it's basically asking, it's an evaluation on kind of what you want to cover, right? So what we believe are sort of the keys to success, your success are, think about your brand. This is when you want to go back to what we talked about, knowing what you want to write about. What is it that's not included in all the stuff in your application? So if you can get an idea of what your recommenders wrote, and you should be asking them, in my opinion, if you can, what is it that's missing? Whatever it's missing that you think is critical, this is what you want to potentially include in your essay. And the great thing is, literally, you can kind of weave the essay. It's pretty open-ended. You can kind of weave the essay question around to basically include whatever you want to write about, right? Don't restate information you've already included. So I read an application a couple weeks ago, and the candidate said exactly what was on the resume and basically exactly what they instructed the recommender to write. There was probably 5 to 10% new material, and I thought, what a waste of word space. You should not be just retreading old material. If you have weaknesses, this is a great place to address it. So if you have a weak GPA, saying, look, you guys would have to wordsmith this, but I want to basically address how my my intellectual aptitude is not accurately reflected by my college GPA. That's a great way for you to sort of start to bring in all the other things that you've done, why your GPA was what it was, the lessons that you learned, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing is you need to know when to stop writing. All right? So it's an open-ended essay question. This does not mean you should write 2,000 words. Okay? I think most good essays are probably 400 to 650, 700 words. Right? If you're writing too much, you really can dull the strength of your application. All right? So if you don't have a plan, you're definitely going to struggle. And to a certain extent, I kind of like the old essay questions because I feel like it exposed people who did not have a plan. I think most people now are going to say, oh, God, I have to have a plan. And I think it will probably make it harder for them to differentiate people, especially because they're only accepting, they're only taking one essay. But, that's sort of my personal opinion. You need to impose sort of, your own discipline in terms of word limit, as I sort of alluded to, and a structure, right? You want to have some structure when you write. Some of the old essay questions about Harvard, tell us about your 3 biggest accomplishments, or tell us why you want an MBA, why you want it from here, why you want it now. Those are essay questions which basically force people to have structure, because you have to have structure to answer all 3 of those essay questions, especially with a tight word limit. This is totally open-ended, so just be sensitive to that. Just because they're not giving you the structure doesn't mean that you shouldn't self-impose. And if you don't impose it, your essay will basically read like, it'll read like a runny egg. Right? It'll just kind of be spread all over, and you won't be able to sort of really have a cohesive message, and you cannot afford to do that in applying to Harvard Business School, right? Now, one of the reasons this isn't easy is because you're going to be concerned about what people are writing about. So other people are writing about. We've gotten questions from our candidates where they literally, I feel like, almost beating down our doors to tell us, well, what are other people writing about? So I'd probably say about 60 to 70% of the people we're working with on HBS are asking us, what else are people writing about, right? What are other people writing about? You don't want to be that person. I would tell you that we've had a number of people get into Harvard Business School, sort of already, we had 2+2 people that got in. We're about totally different things, totally different things. So don't, write about something that allows you to showcase your brand, and don't be overly concerned about what other people write about, okay? The joint degree essay, for those of you who are looking at JD MBAs, it's probably a limited set of people on here. People aren't gluttons for that much punishment, but the question basically is asking you to describe why you need both degrees. Now, I just spoke to someone a couple days ago. He wasn't applying to HBS, but he was telling me he's an MBA already, and he wants to sort of get a JD degree, and he wants to go into private equity. And I asked him why he thought he needed a JD degree, And he basically gave me a reason which I thought wasn't really that solid, right? So he said, well, I need it, in order to do well to get a job. And I said, no, you don't, because most private equity people don't have JDs, and they definitely don't have JD MBAs. And so just be clear as to why you need it, right? Now, that was a professional reason. Personally, there might be personal reasons, but you need to think about that. Why are you applying to both? Why are you applying to get a joint degree? Why is it a good fit for you, right? And what was the catalyst for you sort of getting interested in getting both degrees? If you love Mitt Romney and Mitt Romney's your guy, that's fine. Be like, hey, Mitt Romney, his success in business, et cetera, et cetera. Even something like that, I don't love that because I think it's too distant, but at least there's a reason why. There should probably be something personal, right, about that. Don't overlook your own personal experiences, and make sure that basically you can share with your work colleagues. So we've had people sort of write questions or respond to this kind of question and talk about wanting to start an empire in X, right? And X isn't always legal, literally. Wanting to sort of revolutionize online internet gaming or online gambling in the U.S. Well, that's not legal yet, right? So make sure you're not putting yourself in a position. I know it sounds funny, or does to me anyway, but make sure you're putting yourself in a position where you're not including things which are illegal or which are unsavory, right? So always sort of be minding your P's and Q's. All right. There will probably be a post-reflection essay question. That's what they had last year. So you write an essay, you get invited to an interview, you do an interview, and then basically, they ask you, you just had the interview, how well do we get to know you? We will help you with that. But this is also a place where if you forgot something or you glossed over something, you might want to deep dive into the details to do that, okay? We'll obviously help you if you want help with it, but even if you don't use our help, which is totally cool and fine, make sure you at least sort of take some notes or mental notes about kind of what you talked about. I would definitely advise that when you send your thank you note, you highlight basically some of the things you talked about and include that in your letter saying we touched on A, B, and C, but I didn't really get a chance to go into C in detail, or I didn't get a chance to go into D. I want to give you a little bit more because this aspect is really important to me, and here's why. It probably is not going to be, I forgot to tell you I got promoted to associate in my job, okay? This is a question about how well they got to know you. That's not that interesting. Now, if you could weave it into something a little more dynamic or something like, in that instance, I'm really interested sort of in starting companies, and my new promotion into my job as an associate at, Google Ventures has given me greater insight into how sort of companies in clean tech operate, and I really want to be part of the clean tech club when I come to Harvard, and I think I can leverage sort of my new promotion, my newfound exposure at Google Ventures in order to basically be a really highly contributing member to my HBS class. So that kind of answer allows you to sort of wrap in the fact you were promoted, but it also makes, you contextualize why you told them that, and you made it interesting, and you related it to, benefiting your classmates. And that's kind of what you always want to be looking for. Especially in this post-interview reflection. The interview is invitation only, and they're probably going to interview maybe 25 to 35% of the applicants. The interview is 30 minutes. It's not blind. Okay, this is important in the sense that for some schools when you interview, the interviewer has not seen anything. They've seen your candidacy. So if there are things in there that you want to sort of go over them. If you're asked questions and the questions are similar to sort of what you wrote about as an essay topic, you might want to include new stuff because, the interviewer would have seen that already and he or she may not be impressed, okay? And if you have something big, if you got invited to interview, and let's say you had a 3.0 in college, don't think because you're being interviewed you don't have to address why your GPA is 0.7 off the mean for Harvard, right? So make sure you were addressing the elephant in the room. Do not ignore that. If you've been unemployed for 8 months, but you still got a Harvard Business School interview, which happens, right? Don't think you don't have to talk about what you've been doing for the last 8 months. So make sure you're focused on addressing sort of those big picture items, okay? Recommendations used to be 3. Now it's 2. I believe that works to your benefit. But you're going to need them to fill out a question grid, which is kind of fairly new. where they sort of, they have to talk about sort of, the interaction, your role within the organization, how they interacted with you, what's your role in the organization. So this is probably partially to dissuade people from just getting someone who's super senior in the company but hasn't interacted with them at all. That is not a good idea. It's actually probably to your benefit that they're making this seem so apparently not a good idea. Your comparative performance to your peers is important. So those of you that think you work in a big company and the most important thing is you work in a big company, you have a job there, and that's all that matters, that's not true. How you perform relative to your peers is going to be something that's concretely asked about in your recommendation, which is fairly new. There's going to be some questions about sort of how you respond well to feedback. It's okay. All of us have gotten feedback, even those of us that run companies. You get feedback from investors and employees give you feedback as well. That's okay. It's how you respond to that feedback and how well you've leveraged those lessons in the future. So make sure you're clear about that. You may want to talk to your recommender and say, look, I'm asking to write this recommendation even though I know that, last quarter there was this deal and I sort of made a slight mistake. I hope you feel like I incorporated the lessons and responded well to feedback and, they've not made that mistake again. If you're saying that and they're shaking their head negatively, they don't feel that, you probably don't want to ask them for a recommendation, okay? So just keep that in mind. And then there are additional statements that the recommenders will be asked to answer. So generally, I feel like, as opposed to in previous years, they're really deep diving with the recommenders. And your recommendations, this is all the more reason why you want to direct your recommenders. You don't want to have people write recommendations where they're well-intentioned but they're not strong, okay? So make sure that you're giving them some background. Remind them kind of what you've done in the company. Highlight sort of the fact that you've been promoted, or that you were in the first bucket. Remind them, with regard to your peers, remind them of like the fact that you took feedback and you appreciated the feedback you got, and you hope that you incorporated it, okay? And just let them know that you'll be available to answer any questions they may have. Try to use someone who's current or recent. If you can't use a current supervisor because you work in a company where you're going to get a bonus, or that person can't even know you're going to business school, then it's okay to use a recent supervisor. It's okay to use someone who's a little bit who's senior to you but isn't your direct supervisor. As long as they have knowledge of your work and your performance, that's okay. And you probably want to describe why that's the case someplace. You want them to describe it, or you basically, or you want to describe it in the materials that you're writing, okay? Those of you know that you've already applied, you will find out in about 2 months. So D-Day for a lot of you. Most of you are probably looking at round 2. Round 2 is highlighted here because I do not want you to apply round 3. I was not smart enough to put an X through the round 3 thing, okay? But round 2 is where you need to be going. In round 1 and round 2, Harvard's acceptance, they will probably have 80 to 90% of their class accepted. So do not apply round 3 unless you absolutely have to. You better have a good reason for why you're doing it. And it can't be because you didn't get into Stanford round 1 and and now you're applying to Harvard, right? And that's often what they think, or they think you're not prepared and you weren't serious about going to business school, and both of those are really bad. So try to apply in round 2 if you haven't applied already, right? The 2+2 program, and we'll wrap this up for about 15 minutes of questions. That is for people that basically typically are still in school. You go work for 2 years and then you come back for 2 years. That's where the 2+2 comes into play. Can apply if you're in grad school, okay? Now, that's okay as long as you don't have a full-time job. Basically, you need to have dominant leadership on campus. You need to be fairly active there. Your academics and your test scores are more important than for people who are 3 to 4 years out, who have the ability to sort of say, look, I did well enough in college, but I dominated professionally when I worked full-time. You don't have that advantage. So you have to be really strong academically with regard to your GMAT. Internships are super important. So, call your intern manager and let them know that you're applying, right? Stay in touch with them because you're going to need them to write good recommendations and or be involved, in your application. And you obviously want to have support. And part of the support needs to be that you're mature, you have a really strong vision of what you want to do, you're a leader amongst your peers, you're going to have a lot to offer to your classmates, even though you're going to enter probably at 24. Most people are 27. So those things need to be in the recommendations, okay? We do work with 2+2 people, but You need to have a really good background to qualify. We do not want to take people's money. If you're not sure you have a good background, call us and we can talk to you, but we don't want to take your money and have you apply with really dismal chances of getting in, right? I'm not actually going to go into these cases. These are people we've worked with who basically have gone in. I want to get to the questions because I think you'll have a lot of them. If you don't have questions and I see a couple coming in, then I'll basically go back and review that. The only thing I'll say about the service offerings is that we have a lot of different kinds of service offerings at different price points. I encourage you to take a look. You try to be very deliberate about making sure if you only have $200 or $250, we can help you. And so I think we've done that, and it's been a really good response in the market. And I'll sort of leave it at that. And I will say that you can get a free consultation if you haven't had one yet with either Eric or I. Will definitely talk to you. And we also have a 15% discount for you guys. So there's a lot of love for Beat the GMAT people. You guys are our community. We'll have that discount running for the next 9 days, 10 days until the end of the month, Halloween. Okay, and with that, I want to get to questions. So please type in your questions. Again, I'll keep you anonymous. I already have a couple that I'm going to answer, and we'll do it for another 15 minutes. 15 to 17 minutes, okay? Okay, so question. Will HBS take context into consideration when evaluating GPAs? It's very hard to get a high GPA at Cal, for example. It's famous for grade deflation. That's a good question. Yes, they will, to a certain extent, take that into account. I will say that the problem that you'll have is that, an admissions officer can have empathy for why your GPA isn't so high, but I promise you from every single school, there will be people applying from that school who had the same circumstance you had and still had a really high GPA. So this is very similar to the story of someone saying, I work 20 hours a week, that's why my GPA is 3.1, should I mention that? Yeah, you should mention that, but there probably is someone who worked, 30 hours a week who has a 3.5, right? And so a school can have empathy for you for having sort of being in that situation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, it's going to really work to your advantage. They will take that into account. I mean, there is a little bit more latitude. So, for example, if you major in the science, if you major in engineering, where you can get sort of C's and D's, those things happen occasionally. It's not the same as sort of majoring in humanities, where you don't see, at least a lot of the Ivy League colleges, you don't see people getting, B below the B minus range, as long as you do the reading and the work. So the schools understand that. They also understand if you've taken really hard graduate level courses, but you're not going to get as much of a discount on that as you might think, to be honest with you. So I would definitely keep that in mind. Don't make excuses. Talk about lessons learned, but don't make excuses for the reason you have a 3.2 GPA because your school doesn't award a lot of A's, right? You have to do it very, very delicately. All right. Question. Is community involvement a super mandatory thing to have? Also, what kind of community involvement? Well, I don't know what super mandatory means, and but it's a joke. But it's not mandatory, but it is enhancing. And so most people that are successful applicants to these schools have some kind of community involvement. Now, again, community involvement doesn't necessarily mean working at a soup kitchen. It could be volunteering in your local church or mosque or temple. It could be, working with your peers. So I'll give you an example. We got a couple years ago who worked at Morgan Stanley, and he realized that, like a lot of his peers, sounds funny, we're getting fat. And basically, he realized it's because they didn't have any time to cook healthy or eat healthy. He wrote a cookbook that basically was a 30-minute cook. 3 minutes. Great meals, by the way. I have the cookbook. And basically, that was then adopted and given out to all sort of analysts. And he gave a talk to analysts about basically the importance of sort of maintaining their health in order to have good work performance. That's kind of service to your community, right? As community of analysts. He also was involved in helping his firm volunteer at a local cancer hospital for children in New York, and he helped set up that program. So That's community. It's his work community. He didn't have time to have like a community outside of work because of his job as an investment banker. But I'd be very open to what the definition of community means. But yes, you do. Ideally, you do want to be doing something in that community. I'm not saying you shouldn't apply if you haven't done any community work, but you will be at a disadvantage if you haven't. Okay. All right. Kofi, HBS recommends that international candidates have at least a 109 TOEFL score. Do you think it's possible to apply with a lower score? I do. I do think it's possible to apply with a lower score, but again, it's just like similar to GMAT. You better make sure the rest of your stuff is stellar, and also just recognize that at this level, it's really hard to have the rest of the stuff, the rest of your materials, your essays, your GMAT score, your GPA be that much higher because it's already so high, right? At a median level, it's hard to sort of overcome a weakness in a different area. But yes, I do think below 109. I think assuming the other stuff is really good, I do think you're not writing a check to charity to applying, and you should apply if you feel inclined. All right. All right. A question. If I were applying for admissions for the fall of 2015, i.e., this person's submitting an application next fall to start in 2015. If I'm applying for admissions to start in fall 2015, what would be the top 3 things you would say for me to focus on aside from my GMAT score? Well, I would say it's probably a little bit more of a nuanced answer because it depends on kind of what you're bringing to the table. But to answer your question specifically, I probably would say, 1, doing really well in your job. I think people ask us all the time, what's the most important thing? I'd say doing well in your job. If you are terrible in your job, obviously if you're working at a 2+2 person, no matter what happens, you're going to have a really hard time getting into school. So being dominant in your job, I think finding leadership outside of your job, and as per what we've been discussing, I think thirdly, being able to really sort of demonstrate momentum for your next career. So not waiting for an HBS to accept you to sort of show that you're really focused on your career, but doing things. So if you want to work in Hollywood, maybe you write a screenplay, or maybe you go to sort of the media entertainment clubs, club conferences, or maybe you're sort of volunteering, maybe you're being mentored by somebody in your local city who works sort of in entertainment. Like, start showing that you're creating career momentum with or without an HBS MBA, or without any school's MBA. Schools want to see that. All right. Next question. What would you suggest as a strategy for preparing for the HBS interview? In my interview with the second to last day of interviews, does that hurt my chances? So the second part of your question, no. The timing of when you do interviews doesn't hurt your chances. I think in terms of preparing, I think having a very good idea as to like what you're bringing to the table, having a very good idea as to what your motivation is for an MBA, why you want to get to that school, to HBS. I think having a very good idea of what kind of contribution you're going to make to the program. I think having an idea of kind of what your own conceptions of leadership are, whether or not you've led yourself or been led, how you think you can be an effective leader, examples of when you've been an effective leader, I think are really important. I think, having an alum interview you, I think using a service like ours, I think, those things would probably be helpful to you, but knowing your own sort of application compass will certainly serve you well. All right. A question. Does not having international experience reduce one's chance of admission in HBS? I would say that no. I would say no, but I'd say having international experience enhances your chances of admission. Do you know what I mean? So what I mean by that sense, you may think that's the same, but it's not. And that you're not going to be penalized for not, de facto, you're not going to be penalized for not having international experience, but the people that do have international experience, it is a bit of an enhancement. Okay? I mean, the school is 34% international, and those are people hailing from different countries, but then I'd probably say, I don't know, 20 to 30% of the rest of the people that are Americans have had some kind of international experience. Now, international experience may mean managing an international team. Now, that's not as strong as sort of living in a foreign country, but I would encourage you to think a little bit broadly about what it means to have international experience. Now, it doesn't mean sort of, taking a trip to see, Barcelona, seeing Messi play in Barcelona. That's not really international experience. It would be an amazing trip, I'm sure, but that's not really international experience. But definitely think broadly about that. Okay. Question: what is the best way to project a gap of 6 odd months in my work experience? So I think the question is, how do you explain if you have sort of a gap? Well, look, I think the good news for you is that it's a tough economy, and I think there's more people, although it's dissipating a little bit, but there are more people who have had gaps in the last 2 to 3 years than we've seen in the last like 5 to 6, just because of the economy and what happened in 08, 09, 10, 11, I guess you could say 12. I think that you need to show that the time is used constructively. I think that you need to show that you were a good performer in your previous job. So this is probably where you want to have a recommender from that previous employer, just so you can attest to the fact that maybe you got laid off because of just circumstances. Maybe you're working in a company that went under, like maybe it was a fund, they had to return their money or something to that effect. I also think like just showing that your time is constructively used, I think is really important. So showing that that you were doing something productive for 20 hours a week, at least, I think is good. If you don't have anything like that and you basically were just studying for your GMAT, I don't think that's great. I think that's going to hurt you, to be honest with you. You need to be doing something with your time. So if you're in that, you can't necessarily do something about a gap that happened in the past and now you're working, but if you're in a gap right now, you need to get active with that. You need to be doing something productive, volunteering, something that hopefully enhances your ability to get a job after school and moves towards your career goals. All right. That's an interesting question. So I've got a low GPA. Can I just say I flaked out with my GPA? I didn't study because I wasn't motivated. Is that as a reason too honest? Well, I'm not going to tell you to lie, but that is not something that HBS is going to want to reward, or any other school. So think about it from their perspective. So, the last academic environment you were in that most closely parallels their experience, your experience at HBS, you basically just said, school isn't that important. I don't really care. I'm partying. I'm having a good time, etc. And now you want to be accepted. You want to sort of be accepted into one of the most prestigious schools in the world, institutions in the world, where 70% of the applicants that apply are qualified, yet 12% get in. Like, the school is not going to want to, even if they thought you were brilliant, you still have a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of the school rewarding you for basically just slacking off, right? When the other kid did even a little bit better than you, maybe even a little bit worse, but they worked really, really hard. So that's a tough position. I mean, it's a privilege to go to Harvard Business School. It's not a right, okay? And so that kind of response is going to make the schools feel like you're somewhat entitled. So you need to come up with something better, okay? All right. Question about being an older candidate. So did admissions representatives scrutinize applications of older candidates greater than 30 years of age more intensely? What can older candidates do to strengthen their applications and overcome this issue of age? Okay, so you're assuming that they do. So I guess you've answered your own question. But what I'd say to you is, I do agree with you, all jokes aside. There is a little bit more scrutiny in the context of, are you doing well in your job, or are you looking at going to business school as a reset? Are you going to be able to go to school and find a job that basically pays you at a higher level? You're going to be able to leave at a higher level than when you left. It would re-enter the workplace at a higher level than sort of when you left, right? And I also think there's potentially concern about culture. Like, are you open to sort of working with, if you're 35, are you open to working with like 26-year-olds who have 4 years of work experience and you have like 13? So I think that you have to sort of address that elephant in the room head on. I do think you should be emphasizing what you bring to the table. So you should have a lot of pattern recognition because you've worked for a while, right? And so, you're going to have expertise and context in a certain field or fields that your classmates won't have because you've worked in those fields. So I think speaking about what you bring to the classroom, that your sort of older age and more tenure in your workplace affords you, I think will sort of serve you really well. Okay, so let's wrap it up. 2 o'clock exactly. I hope that was helpful. It was good talking to you. It's kind of weird. It's not really an interaction, but thank you for taking time out in the day. I know some of you guys are hiding at your jobs, trying to act like you're working and doing something productive for your company, and you're doing something productive for yourself. But I do appreciate you doing that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brooke, and reach out if you guys need help.